alternative, 3 astronauts landed on the moon and built their own bases many years before the first Apollo astronauts landed on the moon in 1969, as the result of a secret treaty between the Pentagon and the Zetans. The Zetans helped the Department of Majority colonize the moon with secret bases, and in exchange the Pentagon's Majority Department helped the Zetans colonize the United States with their own secret underground bases. The Pentagon decided that cooperating with the Zetans was a better idea than being invaded. The Zetans showed the Pentagon scientists how to construct nuclear and mercury-powered sources, as well as space shuttles, rockets, and other NASA technology that was inferior to the anti-gravity magnetic-powered sources of the Zetans, and thus at a military disadvantage. Of course, our presidents did not want to go on the 6 o'clock news to talk about how they made a top-secret treaty with a violent conquering foreign planet that in the past nuked the Earth people. Not a bad reason for a big secret. The Pentagon's secret sources were also aided by captured Nazi rocket scientists who were testing sources they got from the Zetan instructors in 1944, when the Zetans had the Nazis do their genetic experiments for them, much easier than abductions. The primitive sources, rockets, and shuttles of the Pentagon insiders, often mistaken for real UFOs, made it to the Moon and Mars. They have never shown the public most of the 2,000 photos they promised us with Viking 1. When the first Apollo astronauts landed on our moon in 1969, they were shocked to find it already inhabited. Thousands of Americans, Soviets, British, French, and Australians were already living there. Astronauts who discovered too much truth and were considered security risks died in those famous accidents in the shuttle, or on the launch pad, etc.
You can see buildings. It's all there. And then a few weeks ago, actually, it was around my birthday, I got to thinking, geez, I wonder if there's anything else. And I pulled out a book out of my library, and I went to that great book place in Portland a few years ago and cleaned them out of every NASA book they had. And a lot of them were printed way back in the 70s, which is before NASA got real talented with their airbrush. And I got this book called SP-246, and it's photos of Apollo 8, 10, and 11. It was published in 1971, and this just happened like in December. I started putting these photos on the scanner and looking at them, and it was just amazing. There is a city. I mean, there's a spaceport, what looks like a spaceport. There's tubes, there's roads, there's vegetation, there's lights. I mean, it's all right there. So I sent this one clip, or this one photo of 2209 to Beth and Ron, and they looked at it, and they said, this is absolutely amazing. So from there, I started clipping more photos, and we found more and more stuff, and that's how it all happened. And those photos are the ones that you have on. You don't think we did. Somebody else is up there. Somebody else built all those buildings. There's no possible way we could have done that.
You think we just kind of inherited them?
Yeah, I think we work with them up there. Now, I don't know who that is up there, but they're the ones that built all that, and we're doing mining. Now, the reason I know that we're involved is several years ago, I ran into a real honest-to-gosh government insider. He's dead now, but he told me three things, and one was that we had been going to the moon since 1962, that the population of Mars was 600 million, and they looked just like us, and the other thing was that he had worked on a piece of mining equipment that was to go to the moon. He said, John, he said, we built this thing down in Alabama, way out in the nowhere. He said, it was so enormous. He said, when we finished the project, he said, I actually rented a little airplane. He said, I'm a private pilot, and flew around this piece of equipment just to get an idea of how big it was. And I said, geez, that's fantastic. How did they get it to the moon?
Yeah.
He said, I don't know. And that's, the deal in compartmentalization. You get to know a little bit of the program, but you don't get to know the whole thing. So he knew a little bit, but he didn't know the whole thing.
What an incredible...
Now, if you ask where the operations are from now and how they keep them so secret, I think it's Antarctica. And
these pictures you sent us, specifically the crater Kepler, and then you look at the airbrushed version. It looks like two different craters.
Absolutely.
I mean, the structures are all gone.
Yeah, like I said, NASA didn't get proficient with their airbrush till about 1972, 73, and they went back and got all these pictures. But those of us who got the early pictures have the good stuff. And on Kepler, you'll see the Lunar Orbiter 3-162 picture. I mean, there's obviously stuff on the crater. There's obviously a strip mine there. There's obviously buildings there. And then you go to the Apollo 12 photo that was taken several years later, and it's absolutely clean. There isn't a trace of anything.
Well, they came down and took all the equipment away. But
yeah.
You're right. It is absolutely incredible. Now, how do you know, though, in some cases, we're not looking at, tricks of light or just different images when you look at this?
Well, take a look at that yourself. I mean, there's buildings on the rim, and then there's not buildings there. Some of the pictures are great. As a matter of fact, did you see the one of of Aristarchus? We're always told that Aristarchus is the brightest spot on the moon. We can see it, and any image you can buy or purchase or moon pictures, it's always just a white blob. And so we had a guy take a 10-inch telescope and take a picture for us, and you can see it right in those pictures that we've got on your website. It's a beautiful structure, and it looks exactly like a nuclear reactor to me. It's probably a fission reactor. There's no doubt about it. You can see the arches. You can see the blue glow, and the blue glow comes from when radiation hits molecules of air. And now you're going to say, wait a minute, there's no air on the moon. Well, as a matter of fact, the moon has a breathable atmosphere, and it has gravity 65% of what's on Earth. So, it has all of that.
And it looks like it's got some arches alongside of it.
Yeah. And then you look at the next picture. I think that Lex got it up there. Look at that picture that Clementine took in 1994. Can you imagine that we got a better picture of Aristarchus from a 10-inch telescope than Clementine did with a $100 million satellite? That's great. I love it.
It doesn't make any sense at all, does it?
It doesn't.
So all this has been going on, you think, right under our noses for 40 years, John?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, somebody pulled up some stuff off the internet that my father was involved in the middle 50s with Anti-Grav, and there's a lot of stuff. If you Google Bill Lear or William Powell Lear Anti-Grav, he was there doing it. He was right in the middle of it. As a matter of fact, there's a 3-minute clip floating around that was originally in David Hatcher Childress video. My dad lecturing on UFOs at the Bonson Laboratories, and he's there at a blackboard. He's got a saucer there drawn on, and he's describing how it works. The film is silent, but you can see generally what he's doing. Interspaced with the pictures of him are technicians working in laboratories with balsa wood and paper UFOs. They're obviously trying to make, what was the beginning of our efforts. I think that all came to a culmination in 1959. We made the craft. We may have had some help, but anyway, our first trip to the moon in anti-grav was 1962. Now, let me tell you this. And you say, well, anti-grav, we don't hear very much about it. And I say, that's right. You don't hear one word about it. You don't see Aviation Week in Space Technology putting, we're working on anti-grav, and here's the experiments. Nothing, not one single word. And the reason is they already perfected it, and they don't want anybody talking about it.
I want to get your reaction, Sean, about this talk about why we never technically went back to the moon. Why did it seem to end publicly, yet we continued going back then?
We were already there. That was all a cover. Those guys, the Apollo astronauts, the first guys to set on it, they weren't the first guys. That was all just a cover program so that nobody would know about the real program. Now, why they wanted to keep the real program a secret, I don't know.
The footage of the American spacecraft landing on Mars before Apollo landed on the moon leaked out in major public British TV for one evening, thanks to a smuggling scientist, before it was censored and never made it to America. British authorities tried to call it a hoax to cover up the leak, but it was no hoax. The only astronaut who has ever died outside of duty said it was the truth on video, and he was silenced. We have seen that interview too, as well as a secret video stewing the scientist who leaked the video being assassinated. A book exposing Alternative 3 appeared in 1976, and was quickly forced out of print. I have read it. You can't even order it, and the printers will not issue a new release in spite of a huge demand. Very strange to turn down that big profit. Not really. On Public France Inter TV on August 3rd, 1962, at 8:00 a.m., and also in the weekly magazine Le Mille, was another leak that was covered up fast. Elaine Ash reported why has no one spoken of the mysterious message heard on the moon, 20 untranslatable words? Perhaps it proves that other men exist, something that NASA wished to hide, words which really sowed the seeds of panic. Everything was going well that day on our moon. Then at 11:15 an extraordinary fading occurred, and contact with Houston was lost. Worden, who was in charge of telecommunications, had his attention drawn by a breathing sound and a long whistle. A sentence was constantly repeated on one note, varying from a small to a shrill tone, and from lightly stressed sounds to raucous exclamations. Luckily the transmission was recorded on Lem's tape recorder, and Worden transmitted it to NASA. Here are the 8 separate words. Mara Rabbi Aladi Dini and the Risa Counselim. Why did the Berlin Wall come down so suddenly and unexpectedly, with the Cold War ending, and enemies becoming friends? Did President Reagan give a clue at his speech at the 42nd session of the General Assembly of the United Nations on September 21st, 1987, saying, in our obsessions with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget much unites the members of all humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bond. I occasionally think that how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet I ask, is not an alien force already among us? In Reagan's speech on December 4th, 1985, he stated if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species from another planet, we'd forget all the little local differences that we had between our countries. Soviet President Gorbachev publicly stated at our meeting in Geneva, the US President said that, if the Earth faced an invasion by extraterrestrials, the US and Soviet Union would join forces to repel the invasion. February 6, 1987 in Soviet life. I absolutely emphasize that you have nothing to fear of the Zetan invasion, as the United Confederation of Planets, the friendly aliens' plans to remove all of them from Earth in 1993. Well, it's 2010 now, and they are still here. This is not for the general public use. Common sense, wisdom, discretion in spreading this information, while avoiding skeptics, paranoid types, religious fanatics, and the emotionally unstable. Civilizations on Mars. In 1959, a flying disc spacecraft from Mars reportedly landed in the wilderness outside of Moscow, in the Soviet Union, where a secret meeting with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev was arranged. The conference regarded improving relations with Earth, exchanging knowledge, and securing world and interplanetary peace, yet the Soviet government rejected the terms. This report originated from Sergeant Willard Wanall, formerly of Army Intelligence, who investigated UFOs in Hawaii while in the military in the 1950s, and met with us while we were in the Department of Interplanetary Affairs Research Agency in the 1970s. On April 24, 1964, an oval-shaped metallic flying object landed in a farm field in Newark Valley in New York State, and two alien beings emerged from the estimated 20-foot-long craft. Farmer Gary Wilcox drove his tractor toward the object, clearly visible on a bright sunny day. The farmer kicked the metallic object to make sure it was real. The two occupants were about 4 feet high, and they carried a square tray full of the different vegetables they had collected from his farm. Wilcox reported that, when he confronted the beings stealing his crops, they said, "Don't be alarmed, we have spoken to people before." Gary described the voices as being very strange. They wore white metallic-looking overalls without seams, stitching or pockets. He could not see their hands or feet. He could not see their other features beneath the full spacesuits, which we speculated were protecting these aliens from the Earth's atmosphere deadly to their race. As Wilcox became inquisitive, one of them stated, "We are from what you know as the planet Mars. We can only come to Earth every 2 years," and left a warning that Earth people should stay out of space. They said that they were studying the organic materials on Earth because of the rocky structure of Mars, and that they did not fly near our cities because they avoided the air pollution. The beings told Wilcox everything in monotone. He asked if he could go with them, and they rejected. Wilcox gave the beings a bag of fertilizer and exchanged information about 10 other subjects before they entered the craft and took off. Wilcox was investigated by a psychiatrist and the sheriff department, who found him a normal, truthful person with no emotional problems, and they confessed they believed his UFO experience was real. In February 1972, United Nations diplomat Farida Rice-Gievat, who investigated UFOs and occupant contacts for the President of the General Assembly, told me and my department agents that she had been contacted by a landed spacecraft from the planet Mars. The reported contact took place in the Mojave Desert, in California, in 1971, and made the front page of the major Arizona newspaper, the Daily Arizona Republic. This story also made the front page of the San Clemente Sun-Post in an article written by Fred Swiggles, who covered President Nixon and his staff at the Western White House. Farida stated that the alien offered to admit an ambassador to their interplanetary confederation in this solar system, in exchange for an alien ambassador to the General Assembly of the United Nations, in an attempt to re-establish diplomatic relations with Earth and other planets that had been suspended in ancient times due to hostility on Earth. However, the terms of this peace arrangement were not acceptable to the Security Council, and the exchange was rejected in a secret meeting. Adam Malik, President of the United Nations, was in favor of the treaty and exchange, and he was in contact with us on this matter. Rice-Gievat and Malik were frustrated with UN attempts to block this exchange, so they came to us to help try to establish a civilian council to handle affairs between the people on Earth and the interplanetary confederation in this solar system. The corporations and military government interests that finance and control the UN did not accept the alien insistence on destroying all weapons, ending all wars, and eliminating all polluting fuels, which are all the biggest bank accounts in the world. The most famous astronomers of the early 20th century, including the great Percival Lovell, stated there were signs of intelligent life on Mars. They reported huge areas of green vegetation that expanded and contracted with the melting of the ice caps and the 4 seasons on Mars. In the 1950s, teachers in public schools in America taught students that the temperature of the equator was about 80 degrees.
Okay, the moon has got gravity. especially on the far side, it's got gravity. Mornay has told me that if you take Copernicus crater and you stood at the bottom, that the gravity is equal to that of Chicago, as if you were standing in Chicago. Because again, it is not the rotation. It is apparently the sunlight, the sun's radiation that creates gravity. At least this is what they say. Now, our moon does not turn on its axis. It rotates around the Earth, but we primarily just see one side, or only 59% of it. By the way, our moon's the only one that does that. You know, it's the only one. Next slide, please. Okay, this was taken out of National Geographic. This was in the early 1950s. This was NASA's idea of what moon bases would look like. They, in fact, did do this and create this in February of 1958. So when Kennedy said, you know, we are going to send man to the moon, part of our government, primarily the NSA, was already there. They were already there. Now, folks, you don't hear much about the Russian space program, but let me tell you something. They are a major player, and they are also here. And they don't work for us, neither does the NSA. They work for international bankers who are the new priesthoods for extraterrestrials. And we're going to cover that. Next slide, please. Okay. According to the Andromedans, there were primarily 9 huge dome cities on the moon, the front and the back. They housed up to 5 million extraterrestrials at one time. There was water, there was vegetation, there was everything they needed. Okay, and these covered hundreds of miles. You know, so when Richard shows you the pictures of the things, you know, the shards, so many miles tall, 9, 10, 15 miles, whatever it is, he's right. He's absolutely right. You know, but there's more. There's more. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is along the equator on the far side of the moon. This is what's left of a pyramid. There are 4 pyramids on the moon. Excuse me. Okay, now I can assure you that the pharaohs, just to practice, did not take the Hebrew or the ivory up here, build one, then bring it back and do it right in Egypt. Didn't happen. According to the Andromedans, almost all the planets in our solar system have pyramids on it. Some have more. I've asked why. Some people say they're tombs. The Andromedan perspective is that these are weights. And what they do is you put them in a strategic location, it balances the rotation of the planet. It doesn't keep it from wobbling, which means that if the ETs are there colonizing, there's no major fluctuations in weather and gravity. Gravity anomalies as well as the electromagnetic field, which is around every single planet. It has to be balanced. That's what these are for. That's why Giza is directly dead center of the landmass on planet Earth. Next slide, please. Okay, can we just focus this a little tiny bit? Okay, folks, I want you to focus on this area right here. I want you to focus on this structure in here. For those of you who are architects, please feel free to, say something about this. This area right here, you can see the curves, the angles. There's another bridge here. I want you to notice these lit up objects inside the bottom of the crater. We've got a close-up of it. Next slide, please. Here we go. Okay, here's another bridge. Apparently this is inhabited by extraterrestrials from Orion. These are, I'm told, are domes. Does everybody see this? Okay. I'm also told that this is a road that goes into here. There's an elevator that goes up to this area here. And when they land, they take an elevator or something down, and then they can walk, because there's atmosphere on the far side of the moon. Which is why the astronauts took pictures of clouds. It's unbelievable. The snow job that we've been given. It's nothing what we've been told it is. Nothing. Right. Next slide, please. Okay, I want you to focus on this. Let me just turn off one. I want you to focus on this area right here. Now, I realize this might be difficult, but I do have a close-up. This is a crater, and there is a structure that comes across it. You can see the sun coming through this way. You can see it shining right here underneath, and you can see this is still in the shade. This structure here. This is a 21-mile long bridge. Next slide, please. Here. I'm always updating. I'm always trying to get clearer pictures. This is 21 miles. Now, you may not see it. You may have to adjust your eyes. I know this isn't easy, but this is it right here. Okay? You can see the sun shining through here. Now, we didn't build this. And how is it that our astronauts missed this? 21 miles. That's from here to almost to Boulder. Next slide. Okay. Look at this. Just sitting there parked. This was taken by the Lunar Orbiter in 1966. Next slide. Now, isn't it interesting that we're told that the craters were created by meteorite impact, or incessant meteorite bombardment? I just love that. Okay? And yet, you have full-fledged mountains in the dead center of these craters. Many of them are even higher than the crater walls. Folks, that's just not possible. It is not possible. You have craters that are 30 to 40 miles in diameter. The deepest one is only 7,000 feet. That is also an absolute impossibility. Richard talks about his dome structures, okay, that had some kind of a glass on it. Right here. I believe, and I'm told that this is what's left of one of Richard's domes, that he has a picture of them, you know, with the long shards and the pieces hanging off. This is what's left of it. As you can see, there's a shiny spot of the glass tickered in, but that's what this is right here. This apparently also was a domed city, but it was destroyed by particle beam weapons between what we now know as the Orion group and a group from the Pleiades. This happened approximately 9,600 years ago. Full-out war here. Next slide, please. Okay, I want you to just check out this area here. All these structures, look at these. Apparently these are hangars. This is a complex that is inhabited by human beings from Earth. Also want you to look at this object. I'm trying to get a better picture of what this large structure is. But what's really interesting about this area here and this is look at nice how sharp this crater is. The corners here. Very nice and sharp.
Esta fue la verdad, la única y secreta verdad. Aquel 21 de julio de 1969, Armstrong y Aldrin se alejaron escasos metros del módulo, filmando esta increíble construcción. Esta película de 14 minutos jamás fue difundida por NASA. Mirlo Rojo fue uno de los pocos norteamericanos que tuvo acceso a ella. A escasos metros sí del Águila. Y no fue casualidad. Todo está minuciosamente programado. Estas misteriosas ruinas, como otras igualmente filmadas por restantes Apolos, habían sido fotografiadas con anterioridad por las diferentes sondas automáticas. Una de ellas, la Surveyor 5, lanzada el 8 de septiembre de 1967, fue decisiva. Alunizó en el Mar de la Tranquilidad, muy cerca de esta construcción, enviando 19.000 fotografías. Edificios en ruinas. Edificios en la superficie de la Luna. Edificios aparentemente de una gran antigüedad. Pero, ¿quién los había levantado? Nosotros los humanos, obviamente no. Solo quedaba una respuesta. Esto era obra de una civilización no humana. Los militares habían satisfecho la primera parte de su diabólico plan. Ahora quedaba la segunda. Según mi confidente, los astronautas procedieron a lo programado. Recogieron muestras de los muros, tomaron medidas y se retiraron. La insólita construcción, muy parecida a un hangar, medía 60 metros de longitud con una altura máxima en los muros de 9 metros. Presentaba 12 huecos o ventanas y una especie de puerta frontal de 5 metros de fondo por 3 de altura. Según los análisis practicados en la Tierra, el material con el que había sido construido era similar al de la superficie lunar. Un 60% de los átomos era oxígeno, con un 0.01% del peso constituido por hidrógeno. Las paredes se hallaban muy erosionadas. Esta circunstancia, dado que en la Luna no existe prácticamente atmósfera, hizo pensar a los militares que el edificio en cuestión podía tener varios miles de años. La secreta excursión de Armstrong y Aldrin a este hangar y naturalmente los 14 minutos de película jamás fueron difundidos por NASA.
Subject of UFOs in particular has been relegated to tabloid journalism, to the arena of science fiction. Why is it, do you suppose, that, or do you believe that it's been given a fair shake by science, and if not, why not?
No, it hasn't, because it's rather clear there's been a lot of misinformation, disinformation. There's been a very active effort on the part of presumably people in the know to discourage public participation, media participation, to discredit the whole area. And that seems to have been true for at least 50 years. And also the very existence of an extraterrestrial presence, or an extraterrestrial existence even, went against the conventional science of 30, 40 years ago. Even when I went to the moon, almost 30 years ago now, it was the conventional wisdom both in science and theology. that we were alone in the universe. And I don't think people really believe that anymore. But that was a conventional wisdom. And the UFO reports have been going on for at least 20 years before that, and some almost 30 years before that. And being denied and swept under the rug and covered up and filled with disinformation.
I think the public is ready to know if anyone has visited us. They can accept that, and they want it.
class. About 30 minutes into the process, he said to me in a very distressed way, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And then he proceeded to put photographs down in front of me, and clearly in these photographs were structures, spherical buildings, and towers.
Always airbrush these out before we sell them to the public.
Mosaics and showed this base, which had geometric shapes. There were towers, there were spherical buildings, there were very tall towers, and things that looked somewhat like radar dishes, but they were large structures. If I compare it to what I'm seeing now, because I do have photographs that have artifacts in them that are similar to what I saw, they're massive. Some of the structures are, half a mile in size. So they're huge structures. Some of the buildings seem to have very reflective surfaces on them. A couple of structures that I saw reminded me of cooling towers at power generating plants. They had that sort of a shape. Some of them were just very, very straight and tall with a flat top. The particular shot that I saw, there were several clustered together over a landscape, a fairly large landscape. I worked there for 3 more days, and I remember going home and naively thinking, I can't wait to hear about this on the evening news. And here it is, more than 30 years later, and I hope we hear about it tonight. And I will testify under oath before Congress that what I'm saying is the truth.
From what I have heard from many insiders at NASA, the moon is an ancient alien spacecraft. The spaceship moon theory, also known as the Vasin-Chernikov theory, is that the moon is a hollowed-out planetoid created by alien greys and reptilites, which consist of a hull like in a shell, and an outer shell made from metallic rocky slag. For reasons unknown, the spaceship moon was then placed into orbit around the Earth. An artificially hollowed-out moon would also explain why the satellite rang like a bell for weeks when struck by the Apollo separation section. It also has been detected to ring when hit by asteroids or heavy space junk. This also happens on Earth and Mars, proving they are also hollowed-out planetoids. Bell-like ringing or reverberations have been detected on Earth after the 1960 Chilean earthquake. This was supposedly the most violent earthquake that had been recorded since the establishment of official world records in 1881. Several pieces of circumstantial evidence that the moon is not natural have been cited by proponents of the theory. They do not necessarily imply that the moon is hollow, but that it was created and placed in position artificially. The moon has only 60% of the density of Earth. The improbable fact that an equal amount of Earth material seemed to weigh almost twice as much as moon matter mystified everyone. Why the difference? The actual answer, some scientists felt, pointed to the possibility that part or all of the moon's interior was hollow. A leading scientist at NASA, in which he states that, according to an analysis of the moon's motion, it appears that the moon is hollow. If the astronomical data are reduced, it is found that the data require that the interior of the moon is less dense than the outer parts. Indeed, it would seem that the moon is more like a hollow than a homogeneous sphere. There are several strange coincidences about the moon that do not add up. The moon occupies a nearly perfectly circular orbit around the Earth, which is not consistent with the circularity of any other celestial orbits. The size of the moon in the sky is thereby effectively consistent to earthly observers, and also is almost precisely the same apparent size as that of the sun. So that a perfect solar eclipse is possible on Earth, the only known location in the solar system where this happens. Another anomaly is the Aristarchus crater. It is a huge nuclear reactor, which can be seen glowing a strange blue color. This is the main power source for the underground city. Also, there is traditional folklore from various regions around the world, which speak of a time before the moon, implying that it arrived at some point in human history and was not present prior to this. For hundreds of years, people have reported seeing flashes, short-lived clouds, and other brief changes on the moon's surface. A new look at observations by the American satellite Clementine showed that a small area on the moon's surface darkened and reddened in April 1994. Something strange is still going on with the moon. NASA is shit scared to go back or to photograph it with high-resolution cameras because of the grays and the Nazis on the moon. The aliens on the moon come and go as they please from the dark side of the moon.
Loud and clear. 7, go ahead.
I'll tell you at 10 o'clock high.
This is Houston. Say again, 7.
I'll tell you at 10 o'clock high.
An object which is at the same place all the time but appears to be tumbling. Well, we've had it ever since yesterday. It just seems to be tagging along with us.
October 21st, 1995.
We have an unidentified flying object.
And nothing after.
Underwater alien base associated with them. If aliens were coming to our planet, there seems little doubt that they would stop at the moon on their way here. The moon itself is kind of the eye in the sky. NASA says that the moon is apparently hollow. During the Apollo missions, the command module crashed into the moon. And the moon rang like a bell for hours. There are craters on the moon which they cannot find bottom to. And it's thought by some researchers that these bottomless craters are entrances inside our moon. The whole enigma of the moon gets weirder and weirder the more you know it. Was the moon actually brought here from another solar system and put into orbit around our planet? In my mind, the evidence is there that the moon is a gigantic spaceship in orbit around our planet. It's occupied by some extraterrestrial race. In many ways, it's much like the George Lucas Death Star concept in Star Wars.